A millionaire caught a single mother taking spoiled milk from a restaurant's trash. The next day, the millionaire decided to show up at her house by surprise, and what he did left her in tears. The alarm clock didn't even need to ring on that cold Thursday morning, as Eleanor had been awake since 4:30 in the morning, lying in her old bed that creaked with every movement. The small, dimly lit apartment still held the silence of dawn, that precious moment before the world wakes up and demands its endless debts. She looked at the cracked ceiling, mentally counting the money she had in her wallet and calculating the expenses for the month that had barely begun. The rent was due in a few days, the electricity bill was overdue, and she still needed to buy Luna's school supplies that the school had requested the previous week. She got up slowly, stepping carefully on the cold floor not to wake her daughter, who was sleeping in the room next door, and walked to the kitchen where she would begin another day of her exhausting routine. "Today will be different. Today something good will happen," she whispered to herself. Her hands trembled slightly from the morning cold. Eleanor opened the nearly empty refrigerator and analyzed what she had available to prepare Luna's breakfast. There were only 2 eggs, half a package of bread that was past its prime, a bit of margarine and a half-full carton of milk that she had been rationing for 3 days. Her eyes scanned each shelf, hoping to find something she might have forgotten, but reality was relentless in its rawness. She took the bread and began cutting it into different shapes using a butter knife, creating stars, hearts, and moons that would transform that simple breakfast into something special for her little one. With the only egg she allowed herself to use, she made a very thin, golden omelette, seasoned with the rest of the salt and a pinch of oregano she had been keeping for months. The smell began to fill the small kitchen, and she smiled, imagining Luna's little face when she saw the table. "She deserves so much more than I can give," she murmured, while wiping away a stubborn tear. Her heart ached every morning during that same ritual. The soft sound of bare feet in the hallway announced Luna's arrival, who appeared at the kitchen door, rubbing her sleepy eyes and dragging her faded pink blanket across the floor. Eleanor immediately transformed her tired expression into a radiant smile, opening her arms to receive her daughter in a tight hug that warmed more than any blanket. The girl, with her disheveled brown hair and unicorn pajamas that were already too small, nestled in her mother's lap for a few precious seconds before noticing the set table. Her eyes lit up when she saw the bread cut into fun shapes and the golden omelette that Eleanor had divided onto 2 plates, obviously giving the larger portion to her daughter. Luna sat down excitedly and began to eat while telling about the dream she had about fairies and castles, gesturing with her fork in the air. "Mommy, when I grow up, I'm going to buy a huge house for both of us, with a kitchen full of food," declared the girl with conviction. Eleanor stroked her daughter's hair, swallowing the lump in her throat. While Luna finished her breakfast, Eleanor began to pack her daughter's school bag, checking each notebook and making sure the pencils still had enough lead for another day of class. The supplies were worn, the notebooks patched with adhesive tape on the covers, and the backpack had a zipper that only closed halfway, but everything was clean and organized with the care that only a dedicated mother can have. She placed inside the empty lunchbox a colorful note she had made the night before, with heart drawings and the phrase she always wrote to make her daughter feel special. Eleanor looked at the wall clock that showed 6:15 in the morning and hurried to get Luna ready, gently combing her hair and tying it with the only hair tie that wasn't broken. The girl put on the school uniform that Eleanor had washed and ironed the night before, making it impeccable, despite the fabric already showing signs of wear. "You are the most beautiful girl in the world. Did you know that?" said Eleanor, kissing her daughter's forehead. Luna laughed and hugged her mother tightly. The walk to the neighbor's apartment, who looked after Luna, was short, just 2 floors below. But Eleanor cherished every second of those moments with her daughter. Every day she left her daughter with the neighbor, who would later take her to school, as Eleanor started work at sunrise before the girls' school hours, so the neighbor, who was a woman with a good heart, helped her, expecting nothing in return. Mother and daughter began their morning routine, walking down the stairs hand in hand, Luna jumping 2 steps at a time while humming a song she had learned at school. The old building showed its decades of existence in every moisture-stained wall and every rusty handrail, but for Luna, that was just the backdrop of her daily adventures. They arrived at apartment 203, where Mrs. Penelope lived, a retired lady who took care of Luna in exchange for a symbolic amount that Eleanor could barely afford. The door opened before they could even knock, revealing the kind, wrinkled face of the lady who was already waiting for them. Luna ran to hug the neighbor, while Eleanor thanked her once again for the help, promising to pick up her daughter as soon as she left work. "Don't worry, dear. We're going to have a lot of fun today," Mrs. Penelope assured with a warm smile. Eleanor kissed Luna once more and hurried out, already late to catch the first bus. The journey to the commercial building where she worked as a cleaner took exactly 45 minutes when traffic was good, but that morning the bus was more crowded than usual. Eleanor squeezed herself between the other passengers, holding firmly onto the metal bar as the vehicle swayed on the potholed city streets. The smell of cheap perfume mixed with morning sweat was nauseating, but she had gotten used to it after years of making the same journey. Her thoughts wandered between bills to pay and the list of tasks she would have to complete at work, mentally organizing each hour of her day to be as productive as possible. The bus stopped abruptly at a traffic light, making all the passengers sway, and Eleanor took the opportunity to look through the foggy window. The city was waking up in its frantic rhythm, hurried people crossing the streets, shops opening their doors, life following its relentless course. Just a few more months and things will get better, she thought, trying to convince herself. Her reflection in the glass showed the fatigue that cheap makeup couldn't hide. Eleanor got off the bus 2 blocks before the final stop, preferring to walk the last meters to save a few cents on the return fare. The commercial building where she worked stood imposingly with its 20 floors of mirrored glass, a stark contrast to the reality of those who cleaned its bathrooms and corridors. She entered through the service entrance, greeting the night security guard who was still finishing his shift, and headed to the employee locker room in the basement. The environment was damp and poorly ventilated, with rusty metal lockers where employees kept their belongings. Eleanor changed quickly, putting on the faded blue uniform provided by the company, tied her hair in a tight bun, and stored her purse in the locker she shared with 2 other colleagues. She took the already prepared cleaning cart and went up the service elevator to the 12th floor, where she would begin her routine. "At least today is Thursday. Tomorrow is already Friday," she muttered to herself, trying to find motivation. Her hands were already hurting before she even started working. The 12th floor corridor was silent at that hour of the morning, with only a few lights on in offices where more dedicated employees had already arrived. Eleanor began her routine with the women's bathroom, as she always did, applying cleaning products with the experience of someone who knows every stain and every difficult corner. The strong smell of disinfectant no longer bothered her. It had become part of her professional identity. While scrubbing the floor on her knees, her mind wandered to Luna, imagining what her daughter might be doing at that moment, whether she was playing or watching the old cartoons that Mrs. Penelope recorded for her. The sound of high heels echoing in the corridor brought her back to reality, and Eleanor hurried to finish the bathroom before someone needed to use it. Her back protested with every movement, reminding her of the years accumulated in that uncomfortable position. "All for Luna, everything is worth it for her," she repeated mentally like a mantra. Physical pain was bearable when it had a greater purpose. It was already 9 in the morning when Eleanor finished cleaning the first 3 floors assigned to her. Sweat ran down her forehead despite the building's cold air conditioning, and her hands were red and dry from the chemicals. She stopped for a moment in the empty corridor to drink water from the small bottle she always carried, when she saw her supervisor approaching with firm steps and a serious expression. The man, always impeccable in his grey suit and perfectly aligned tie, stood before her with his hands in his pockets and his gaze avoiding hers. Eleanor immediately felt that something was wrong. Her stomach tightened into a knot as she waited for him to speak. The silence lasted a few seconds that seemed like hours, until finally he cleared his throat and began to speak in a professional and distant tone. "Eleanor, I need to talk to you in the administration office," he said without emotion. The cleaning cart seemed to weigh a ton when she pushed it back. The administration office was on the 2nd floor, an environment with 2 powerful air conditioning and furniture that cost more than Eleanor earned in a year. She sat in the indicated chair, her sweaty hands gripping the hem of her uniform, while waiting for the sentence she already sensed. The supervisor sat on the other side of the glass table, opened a folder with documents, and began to speak without making direct eye contact. The heavy silence was broken when he finally began, his monotonous voice echoing off the white walls of the office. His hands drummed nervously on the table as he chose his words. Eleanor could feel the cold sweat running down her back, even with the icy air blowing directly on her. "Eleanor, the company is going through a restructuring. We need to cut costs, and unfortunately, we will have to let some employees go," he announced coldly. Each word was like a stab in Eleanor's chest. Eleanor felt the world spinning around her, but forced herself to stay focused. 3 years of dedicated work. She had never missed a day, never complained, always worked overtime when asked. The supervisor pushed the termination papers toward her, pointing to where she should sign. The amount written there was ridiculous, an affront to all her effort and dedication. Her hands were shaking so much that she had to rest them on the table to be able to speak. The office seemed to have gotten smaller, the air heavier, suffocating. "How much will you pay me?" she asked in a weak voice. The supervisor adjusted his tie before answering, still avoiding looking her in the eyes. "Unfortunately, we can only pay the legal minimum, 1 week of work," the supervisor responded clinically, as if he were reading a weather report and not destroying someone's life. Eleanor felt tears burning her eyes but refused to cry there. She wouldn't give him that satisfaction. She took several deep breaths, trying to find her voice amid the despair consuming her. She needed to try, needed to fight, couldn't simply accept. She raised her eyes to the man who had the power to change everything, but chose not to do so. Her voice came out shaky, but determined when she managed to speak again. The words poured out in a desperate torrent, each one loaded with the weight of her survival. "Sir, please, I need this job. I have a 7-year-old daughter. I'm a single mother. Her father abandoned us when she was 2, never showed up again, never sent a penny," she pleaded. The supervisor finally looked at her, but his eyes were empty of compassion. Eleanor continued, her voice gaining urgency as she listed each injustice of that situation. Her hands gestured frantically as she spoke, trying to make that man understand the gravity of what he was doing. The cold air conditioning made her body tremble, or perhaps it was the pure desperation running through her veins. She could taste the salt of the tears she was trying to hold back, but which stubbornly formed in the corners of her eyes. "Sir, I've worked here for 3 years, 3 years. I never asked for a raise, never complained when you asked me to clean extra floors. Remember when there was that important event, and I came on a Sunday without receiving overtime because you needed me to," argued Eleanor, her voice trembling. The supervisor looked at his watch, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed. "I understand your situation, Eleanor, but this is a decision that comes from above, from the board. There's nothing I can do," said the supervisor, already standing up and buttoning his suit jacket. Eleanor felt panic rise in her throat like bile. It couldn't end like this. She couldn't accept this financial death sentence without fighting until the last second. She stood up too, her wobbly legs barely supporting her, and walked around the desk with desperate steps. The supervisor took a step back, clearly uncomfortable with the proximity and the raw emotion that Eleanor displayed. She could see her own desperate reflection in his expensive glasses, a destroyed woman begging for mercy. "Please, sir. I've never missed a single day. Not when I was sick, not when Luna was sick. I came to work with a fever, with pain, always," she pleaded. The tears now flowed freely, leaving dark trails on her face. "Eleanor, please maintain your composure," asked the supervisor, nervously adjusting his tie. But Eleanor was beyond the point of caring about composure or dignity. Her daughter's survival was at stake, and she would do anything, beg anyone, abandon any trace of pride if it meant keeping a roof over Luna's head. Her hands trembled violently while she continued her desperate plea. The supervisor tried to go around the desk toward the door, but Eleanor moved too, partially blocking his path. "Sir, just yesterday the manager from the 15th floor praised my work. She said the bathrooms had never been so clean. I can get a recommendation letter from her. I can prove I'm a good employee," Eleanor argued. Her voice was hoarse from talking, from begging. "The layoffs aren't about performance, Eleanor. They're cost cuts. The company has outsourced the cleaning service," revealed the supervisor, finally showing a flash of genuine discomfort. Eleanor felt as if she had been struck by lightning. Outsourcing. She would be replaced by someone who would earn even less, with no benefits, nothing. The injustice of it suffocated her. She had dedicated 3 years of her life to that company, cleaning up their mess, invisible but essential, and now she was being discarded like an old rag. "So you're going to hire other people to do the same job for less pay? Is that it?" "After everything I've done for this company?" questioned Eleanor, indignation momentarily overriding desperation. The supervisor looked away, confirming her suspicions without needing to say a word. "I've always been praised. You yourself said last year that I was one of the best employees. How can you do this to me?" continued Eleanor, now alternating between anger and despair. She could feel her voice failing, the knot in her throat tightening more and more. The supervisor finally managed to reach the door, his hand already on the doorknob. Eleanor made one last desperate attempt, throwing away any trace of dignity she had left. She fell to her knees right there on the expensive carpet of that cold office, hands joined in supplication. "Please, I beg you, my daughter will starve, will be evicted. We have no one, no family to help. Please, I'll do anything," she cried between sobs. The supervisor stopped, turned partially, and for a brief moment Eleanor saw something in his eyes, perhaps pity, perhaps just discomfort. "If I hear about any openings elsewhere, I'll let you know," muttered the supervisor as he was already going out the door. Eleanor was still on her knees when the door closed with a definitive click. She remained there alone in that office that smelled of expensive furniture and air conditioning, her dignity in pieces on the floor along with her tears. Slowly, very slowly, she stood up. Her legs were shaking so much that she had to lean on the desk. She looked at the envelope with the money on the desk. $350. A week's work. 3 years of dedication were worth a week's salary. "How will I tell this to my daughter? How will I look her in the eyes and say I failed?" she whispered to the emptiness of the office. Silence was her only answer. Eleanor returned to the locker room in a state of shock, each step seeming automatic. The other employees she met along the way greeted her without knowing it would be the last time. In the damp, dark locker room, she changed her clothes slowly, folding her uniform for the last time with unnecessary care. She stored her few belongings in a plastic bag she found tossed in a corner. She took one last look at the empty locker and closed the door with a final click. The envelope with the severance pay weighed in her purse like lead. She climbed the stairs toward the exit, each step a farewell. "I need to be strong, I need to find a solution," she repeated mentally like a mantra. The security guard at the entrance greeted her cheerfully, not knowing it was the last time. The midday sun momentarily blinded her when she left the building. The city continued its frantic pace, indifferent to the small personal drama that had just unfolded. Eleanor began to walk with no definite direction, her feet automatically taking her toward the bus stop, but she stopped halfway. She was in no hurry to get home, no hurry to face the reality that awaited her. She stopped at a park bench and counted the money once more. $350, not a penny more. The rent was $600. The electricity bill was overdue. She needed to buy food, school supplies for Luna. The numbers didn't lie. The cruel mathematics of poverty showed no mercy. "One step at a time, Eleanor. One problem at a time," she said to herself out loud. A passerby looked at her strangely and quickly moved away. It was then that Eleanor heard a faint sound, almost a lament. She looked around and saw, sitting on another bench nearby, an elderly lady who seemed completely lost. The woman held an old purse against her chest and looked around with frightened eyes, searching for something familiar in that sea of unknown faces. Eleanor watched for a few seconds, hoping someone would stop to help, but people walked right past, some even deliberately moving away. The lady was trying to get the attention of passers-by, but everyone ignored her. Eleanor crossed the small square and approached slowly, noticing the simple but clean clothes of the elderly woman, her grey hair well combed despite being disheveled by the wind. "Ma'am, is everything all right? Do you need help?" Eleanor asked gently. The elderly woman looked up with teary eyes, relief evident on her time-marked face. "Miss, I'm lost. I left home to buy medicine for my husband, but I can't remember the way back. I don't know where I am." The lady replied with a trembling voice, showing a crumpled prescription in her wrinkled hands. Eleanor sat beside her on the bench, noticing that the elderly woman was sweaty and her dry lips indicated dehydration. The sun was strong and there wasn't enough shade. The confusion in the lady's eyes was genuine, the fear palpable. Eleanor gently took the prescription and saw they were expensive medications for blood pressure and memory. The date was from that same day, which meant the lady had been lost for several hours. "My name is Eleanor. What's your name?" she asked affectionately, holding the elderly woman's trembling hand. The lady seemed to calm down a bit with the human touch. "Elizabeth, my name is Elizabeth. I live near a church. There's a large garden in front. Or is it behind?" "I can't remember clearly," said the elderly woman, frustration evident in her voice. Eleanor realized that Elizabeth needed water and food before anything else. She looked at her purse where the envelope with all the money she had in the world was, then looked at that helpless lady. There was no hesitation. She helped Elizabeth stand up, noticing how she limped slightly on her left leg, and guided her to a nearby diner. The place was simple, with formica tables and a noisy fan, but it had fresh air and shade. "Let's have something to drink and eat a little. Then we'll figure out where you live," Eleanor promised. Elizabeth squeezed her arm gratefully, like a lost child who had finally found help. At the diner, Eleanor ordered cold water and a sandwich for Elizabeth, mentally calculating how much it would cost. While the elderly woman ate slowly, savoring each bite, Eleanor tried to extract useful information about where she lived. Elizabeth mentioned disconnected fragments of memories: a sick husband, grandchildren she didn't see, a dog that had died. Nothing that helped locate her home. When the bill came, Eleanor paid without hesitation, the money painfully leaving her already thin envelope. Elizabeth took her hand and squeezed it affectionately. "You're an angel, my child. God will reward you for this," said the elderly woman with tears in her eyes. Eleanor forced a smile, trying not to think about her own tears. "Now let's buy your medicine," said Eleanor, helping Elizabeth to stand up. The pharmacy was 2 blocks away, and during the walk the elderly woman leaned heavily on her arm. Inside the establishment, Eleanor handed the prescription to the pharmacist, who began to separate the medications. Elizabeth wandered the aisles, touching products randomly, clearly disoriented. Eleanor followed her closely, gently guiding her back when she strayed too far. When the pharmacist announced the price, $320, Eleanor felt her heart tighten. It was almost everything she had, but she looked at Elizabeth holding a bottle of children's shampoo and smiling at the teddy bear on the label. "I'll take it," said Eleanor, handing over the money. Her hands didn't tremble this time. With the medicine in the bag and only $30 left in her pocket, Eleanor guided Elizabeth out of the pharmacy. She needed to find this lady's family urgently. She tried once more to make Elizabeth remember something useful, but the confusion seemed to worsen. They were standing on the sidewalk, Eleanor desperate, not knowing what to do, when a woman dressed in white appeared running down the street. She was clearly a nurse, her badge swinging as she ran, her face red from effort and worry. Mrs. Elizabeth, thank God I found you," shouted the nurse, almost crying with relief. Elizabeth looked at her with vague recognition, but still confused. "We've been looking for hours. The family is desperate. How did you end up here?" asked the nurse, hugging Elizabeth and checking if she was okay. Eleanor took a step back, discreetly handing over the bag with the medicine. The nurse noticed her for the first time, observing her simple clothes and tired face. Eleanor quickly explained that she had found Elizabeth lost and helped her. The nurse opened the bag and saw the already purchased medicine, her face filling with amazement. "Did you buy the medications? But that must have cost," the nurse began. Eleanor was already walking away. She didn't want gratitude or reimbursement. "Take good care of her. She's dehydrated and confused," said Eleanor as she began to move away. Elizabeth waved with a sweet smile, without really understanding who that woman was who had saved her. The nurse still tried to call Eleanor back, probably to offer some kind of reward, but Eleanor quickly disappeared among the pedestrians. She didn't want payment for doing what was right. She walked a few more blocks before stopping to really process her situation. She had $30 in her pocket, no job, bills coming due. "I did the right thing. My mother would be proud," she whispered to herself. The sky was beginning to darken with rain clouds. Eleanor continued walking aimlessly through streets that began to empty as the afternoon progressed. The sky heavy with dark clouds promised rain that perfectly matched her state of mind. She knew her money wouldn't cover the basics, and the weight of this reality crushed her with each step. She passed by a storefront and saw her reflection, a 32-year-old woman who seemed to have aged a decade in just one day. Her eyes were red and swollen, her hair disheveled, escaping from the bun she had made so carefully that morning. People passed by without noticing her existence, each absorbed in their own problems and lives. Eleanor stopped at a busy corner, observing the constant flow of cars and pedestrians, all with somewhere to go, some clear purpose. I need to get home before Luna returns from school. I need to look normal, seem like everything is fine, she murmured to herself. A lady passing by looked at her strangely and quickly moved away. The path to the bus stop seemed endless, each step a reminder of her new reality. Eleanor mentally counted the money she would need for bus fares in the coming days. If she saved, if she walked more, maybe she could stretch those $30 for one day. But then what? And food? And the rent due in 2 days? The questions hammered in her head like a persistent headache that no medicine could cure. She arrived at the bus stop and sat on the hot metal bench, sharing the space with a young mother trying to calm a crying baby. The child's crying seemed to echo her own internal despair, and Eleanor had to fight against the urge to cry along. The bus arrived crowded, as always, and she squeezed between the other passengers, holding firmly to the metal bar. Luna can't know yet. I need to find a solution before telling her, she thought as the vehicle bounced on the potholed streets. The man beside her smelled of sweat and cheap cigarettes. During the 40-minute journey, Eleanor made a mental list of all the places where she could look for work the next day. Restaurants always needed kitchen helpers, markets hired stockers, families looked for housekeepers. It didn't matter what it was. She would accept anything. Pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. The bus stopped abruptly at a light, throwing everyone forward, and an elderly lady almost fell. Eleanor instinctively held her, even having to let go of the bar to do so. The lady thanked her with a gentle smile that reminded Eleanor of Elizabeth. Had she arrived home safely? Had her family been worried? She shook her head, pushing away these thoughts. She couldn't afford the luxury of worrying about others when her own life was falling apart. Focus, Eleanor. One problem at a time, she said to herself quietly. The man next to her looked at her curiously, but said nothing. She got off the bus 2 stops before hers to save on the return fare, even though it meant a 20-minute walk under the sun that still burned despite the clouds. The streets of the neighborhood where she lived clearly showed the difference between her world and the world of mirrored offices where she had worked. Broken sidewalks, graffitied walls, garbage accumulated at corners. But it was there that her life was, her daughter, her home however humble it might be. She passed the small grocery store where she bought on credit when money ran out before the end of the month, waved to the owner who was at the door. He waved back, but Eleanor saw in his eyes that he knew she already owed too much. She couldn't count on credit there again. The bakery on the corner exhaled the smell of fresh bread that made her stomach growl, reminding her that she hadn't eaten anything since breakfast. Hunger passes. Luna needs to eat first, she murmured as she quickened her pace. A child playing on the sidewalk reminded her of when Luna was that age. The building where she lived appeared at the end of the street like a tired sentinel, its walls stained with moisture and rust, telling stories of decades of neglect. Eleanor climbed the 3 flights of stairs slowly, each step creaking under her feet. She could hear the familiar sounds from each apartment, the loud television from 201, the crying baby from 304, the gospel music from 402. It was a symphony of poverty she knew by heart. She stopped in front of Mrs. Penelope's apartment door to pick up Luna, took several deep breaths to compose her face into a normal expression, and knocked. The door opened almost immediately, and Luna jumped into her arms with the infinite energy of children. Eleanor hugged her too tight, tight enough for the girl to complain laughingly. "Mom, you're crushing me," laughed Luna, wriggling free. Eleanor forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "How was your day, my love?" asked Eleanor while thanking Mrs. Penelope with a nod. The neighbor noticed something wrong. Eleanor could see the question in her eyes, but the lady had the good sense not to ask in front of Luna. During the short walk to their apartment, Luna chatted about school, about her new friend, about the drawing she had made in art class. Eleanor listened with divided attention, responding automatically at the right moments, her heart tightening with each innocent smile from her daughter. When they entered the small and stuffy apartment, Eleanor went straight to the kitchen to check what she had. However, she saw that she had few ingredients. It would be enough for her daughter's dinner today, and maybe tomorrow's lunch if she stretched it well. Luna threw her backpack on the sofa and ran to the bedroom to change clothes. "Mum, can I watch TV for a little while before dinner?" she shouted from the bedroom. Eleanor said yes, anything to keep her daughter distracted and happy. While Luna watched an old cartoon on the only channel that came in well on the old television, Eleanor began to prepare dinner with the little she had. The old stove took time to light, as always, and she had to tap on the gas canister to check how much was left. By the hollow sound, not much. One more worry to add to the endless list. She cut the tomato into very thin slices to make it go further, seasoned the rice with the last bouillon cube she had saved, and fried an egg for Luna. For herself, there was nothing. As she cooked, her mind wandered to the coming days, the coming weeks. How would they survive? How would she pay the rent? Luna's school would ask for new supplies soon. The uniform was getting small. Stop thinking about that now. One thing at a time, she whispered to herself as she stirred the rice. The hot steam made her eyes water, or at least that's what she told herself. Dinner was served at the small kitchen table that also served as Luna's study desk and Eleanor's work area, when she brought extra sewing home. Luna ate with appetite, not noticing that her mother hadn't set her own plate or eaten at any point. Eleanor watched her eat, memorizing every gesture, every smile, every expression. It was for her that she needed to be strong, for her that she couldn't give up. Luna told a joke she had learned at school, something about an elephant and an ant, and laughed so hard at her own joke that she nearly choked. Eleanor laughed along, a genuine laugh this time, the first of the day. In these simple moments, she found strength she didn't know she had. "Mum, tomorrow there's physical education, and the teacher said we're going to play a really fun game. Can you do that special braid in my hair?" asked Luna with bright eyes. Eleanor promised she would, hiding the pain of not knowing if tomorrow she would have the strength for something so simple. After dinner, Eleanor helped Luna with her homework, a math assignment about addition and subtraction. Ironically, she was teaching her daughter to add and subtract, while her own life was an impossible equation where the numbers never balanced. Luna was intelligent, learned quickly, and Eleanor felt immense pride mixed with fear. How would she ensure that her daughter continued studying? How would she give her the opportunities she herself never had? When they finished the lesson, it was bath time. The water was cold because the shower had broken the previous week, and Eleanor had no money to fix it. She heated water on the stove and improvised a basin bath for Luna, transforming necessity into play. "This is how ancient princesses bathed," she told her daughter, who laughed delightedly. Eleanor watched her dry off and put on her pajamas, that nightly ritual that could soon be interrupted if they were evicted. Eleanor laid Luna on the bed and sat beside her to tell a story, as she did every night. She invented a tale about a brave girl who saved the kingdom with her kindness and intelligence, projecting onto Luna all the hopes she had for her future. The girl fought against her heavy, sleepy eyes, wanting to hear the end of the story, but the day's fatigue won. Eleanor stayed a few more minutes watching her sleep, her face serene and innocent, completely oblivious to the approaching storm. She kissed her forehead delicately and left the room, closing the door carefully. The dark and silent living room awaited her, and with it all the fears she had repressed during the day. She sat on the old sofa and counted the money once more, as if by miracle it would multiply. "How will I protect her from all this?" she asked the emptiness. The silence of the apartment was her only answer. It was almost 10 o'clock at night when Eleanor heard strong knocks on the door. Her heart immediately raced. Knocks at this hour were never good news. She got up from the sofa where she had dozed off from exhaustion and went to the door, looking through the peephole. The property owner was there, accompanied by a man she recognized as a bailiff. Her stomach dropped. With trembling hands, she opened the door just a crack, trying not to make noise so as not to wake Luna. The landlord, a fat, sweaty man who always smelled of stale beer, pushed a paper in her direction without even saying good evening. Eleanor immediately recognized what it was, an eviction notice. The letters seemed to dance before her eyes as she tried to process what was happening. What? But the rent is only due the day after tomorrow, she protested in a low voice. The landlord shrugged with indifference. The rent is 2 months late, Eleanor. You promised me you would pay everything this month, remember? Said the landlord in a harsh voice, pulling a worn notebook from his pocket where he noted all debts. Eleanor felt her blood freeze. He was right. In the desperation of surviving day by day, she had promised to pay off the entire debt this month, counting on the salary she would no longer receive. The bailiff, a thin man with glasses, remained silent, just observing and taking notes on a clipboard. Eleanor could feel panic rising in her throat like bile, but forced herself to keep her voice low and controlled. Luna couldn't wake up, couldn't see this. The landlord continued, his beer breath invading the space between them as he leaned forward, his fat finger pointing at her accusingly. It's 1,200 in total, Eleanor. 1,200. I have bills to pay too. I have a family to support, he complained, his voice rising. Eleanor made a desperate gesture, asking for silence, pointing inside the apartment where Luna was sleeping. Please, speak quietly. My daughter is sleeping. Mr. Carlos, please give me a few more days. I'll get the money, I promise. I just lost my job today, but I'll find another one quickly, she begged, hating the desperation in her own voice. The landlord laughed, a bitter, humorless sound that echoed through the dimly lit corridor. His red, sweaty face shone under the weak light of the only working lamp, and Eleanor could see the bulging veins in his thick neck. He shook his head negatively, crossing his huge arms over his prominent chest. The bailiff cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, but continued writing on his clipboard. Eleanor tried again, her voice trembling with the effort to remain controlled. Mr. Carlos, I've always paid. In 3 years living here, I was only late these 2 months. You know I'm a good tenant. I've never caused problems, she argued. The landlord snorted with disdain. Good tenant? Good tenants pay on time, Eleanor. I'm not a charity institution. I have others interested in the apartment who would even pay more for the rent, the landlord retorted, his harsh voice cutting the air like a razor. Eleanor felt her legs weaken, but stood firm at the door, partially blocking the entrance as if that could prevent the inevitable. The bailiff looked at his watch, clearly wanting to finish this quickly. It was the last eviction of the night, Eleanor could see from the stack of papers on his clipboard. She was just another number, another statistic in the housing crisis plaguing the city. Mr. Carlos, I beg you. I was late only these last 2 months because my daughter got sick, and I had to buy medicine. She was very ill. I had to choose between paying the rent or saving her. It wasn't out of malice. I've lived here for years. This was the first time I was late, not because I wanted to, but because it was necessary for my daughter's health. I lost my job today, but I'll find another one. I'm not afraid of work. Tomorrow I'll go out looking for a job. I can do cleaning at your other properties. I can work for you to pay the debt, Eleanor offered, abandoning any trace of pride. The landlord seemed to consider for a moment, but then shook his head. I don't need a cleaner. I need tenants who pay. You have 24 hours to pay everything or leave. If you don't leave willingly, we'll come back with the police for forced eviction, announced the landlord, already turning to leave. Eleanor, in an act of pure desperation, grabbed his sweaty arm. The cheap fabric of his shirt was damp and sticky under her fingers. The bailiff approached alertly, his hand instinctively going to the radio on his belt. Eleanor released immediately, raising her hands in a sign of peace, but took a step forward, partially exiting the apartment. Tears were beginning to form in her eyes, but she blinked quickly to push them away. She couldn't cry, not there, not in front of them. Please, think about my daughter. She's only 7 years old. Where will we go if you evict us? We'll end up on the street. Do you want that on your conscience? She tried once more, her voice breaking. The landlord stopped, turned slowly, and Eleanor for a moment had hope. Conscience? You want to talk about conscience? The landlord began, his voice rising dangerously. What about my conscience when the bank comes to take this building because I haven't paid the mortgage? And when my wife complains that we don't have money to pay for our children's private school? You think you're the only one with problems? He shouted, his face turning even redder. Eleanor stepped back, his words hitting her like slaps. The bailiff put his hand on the landlord's shoulder, murmuring something about keeping calm. The man took several deep breaths, adjusting his wrinkled shirt. Eleanor tried one last card, her voice now just a desperate whisper. "Mr. Carlos, you've known me for 3 years. You know I'm honest, hard-working. Please, 1 week. Just 1 week," she begged. The landlord looked at her with something that could be pity, but more likely was just discomfort. "Eleanor, I've given too many chances already. Last month you promised you would pay. The month before that, the same thing. I can't trust your promises anymore," said the landlord, his voice now lower but no less firm. He took a dirty handkerchief from his pocket and wiped the sweat from his forehead. The bailiff handed a copy of the warrant to Eleanor, who took the paper with trembling hands. The letters danced before her eyes, blurred by the tears she refused to let fall. The landlord continued, now in an almost professorial tone, as if he were explaining something to a particularly slow child. 24 hours, Eleanor. Tomorrow at 10 o'clock I'll be here. If the money isn't in my hand, you leave. And if you don't leave willingly, you'll leave by force. The police won't have pity for a crying child," he threatened. Eleanor felt a wave of anger mixed with despair. "You're a monster! How can you talk like that about an innocent child?" Eleanor shouted, momentarily forgetting to keep her voice down. The landlord shrugged, completely indifferent to her suffering. The bailiff stepped away, clearly wanting to end this. He had seen this kind of scene dozens of times. Desperate families begging for more time. Inflexible landlords demanding their money. It was the cruel cycle of urban poverty, and he was just a cog in this merciless machine. "Monster or not, I want my money. 24 hours, repeated the landlord one last time. Eleanor made a final attempt, her voice now hoarse from so much begging. "What if I can get half? 600 now and the rest in a week," proposed Eleanor, even knowing she didn't have anything close to that amount in her pocket. The landlord seemed to consider for a moment, scratching the poorly trimmed beard that covered his double chin. For a brief moment, Eleanor had hope. Maybe he would accept. Maybe she would have more time to think of something. But then he shook his head negatively, killing her last hopes. "All or nothing, Eleanor. 1,200 or you leave. I won't negotiate," he declared definitively. The bailiff put away his clipboard and began to move away down the hallway. "Mr. Carlos, please. I cleaned your personal apartment last year when your wife asked. Remember, I never charged extra. I helped when your mother got sick. I stayed with her at the hospital," tried Eleanor, desperately listing every favor she had done. The landlord stopped once more, turned around, and for a moment his face seemed to soften. Eleanor held her breath, hopeful. But then he spoke, and his words were like nails in her coffin. "I know what you've done, but business is business. 24 hours, he finished. Without another word, he walked away down the corridor, his heavy steps echoing on the stairs. Eleanor stood at the door, watching the two figures disappear into the darkness of the poorly lit hallway. The eviction notice in her hands was trembling so much that she could barely read the printed words. 24 hours. In 24 hours, she and Luna would be on the street. She closed the door slowly, leaning against it as if she could keep reality outside. The silent apartment seemed to mock her with its apparent normality. The same old furniture, the same stained walls, the same creaking wooden floor. "How will I get Luna out of here? How will I explain?" she whispered to the emptiness. Her legs finally gave way, and she slid to the floor. Eleanor closed the door slowly and leaned against it, her legs finally giving way. She slid to the floor, the crumpled eviction notice in her trembling hands. 24 hours. How could she get the money for 2 months of overdue rent in 24 hours? It was impossible, simply impossible. She looked around the small, humble apartment that had been her home for 3 years. The walls she had painted so lovingly when they moved in, the old but clean furniture, Luna's drawings stuck to the refrigerator. All of this would be taken from them. She got up with difficulty and went to the bedroom door to check if Luna was still sleeping. The girl was serene, hugging the old teddy bear that was her favorite toy. "I'll solve this, my love." "Mommy will find a way," whispered Eleanor, a promise she didn't know how to keep. She returned to the living room and began to pace back and forth, her brain working frantically in search of solutions. Could she borrow money? From whom? She had no family. The few friends she had were as poor as she was. Sell something? She looked around. The old television was worthless. The furniture was all donated or bought at thrift stores. Her jewelry? She laughed bitterly. The only jewelry she had was cheap costume pieces. Despair consumed her like a slow fire, burning all hope, all dignity. She stopped in front of the window, looking at the dark street below. Other buildings just like hers rose around, each illuminated window hiding its own stories of struggle and survival. "I can't give up. Luna needs me," she said to her reflection in the glass. But the words sounded empty against the brutal reality. Suddenly she heard footsteps in the hallway and Luna's sleepy voice calling from the bedroom door. Eleanor quickly hid the eviction notice and forced a smile when her daughter appeared, rubbing her eyes. Luna was barefoot, the unicorn pajamas that were already too small revealing her bare calves. Eleanor went to her and picked her up, even knowing the girl was getting too heavy for that. Luna nestled her head on her mother's shoulder, still half asleep. Eleanor took her back to bed, lying down beside her until she fell asleep again. She stayed there, observing her daughter's angelic face, memorizing every feature, every freckle, every eyelash. "I had a nightmare, Mom. I dreamed we had to leave," Luna murmured, before falling completely asleep. Eleanor swallowed the sob that threatened to escape. When she was sure Luna was deeply asleep, Eleanor left the room silently. She couldn't cry in front of her daughter. She didn't want the girl to see her despair. She took the key and went out to the hallway, sitting on the emergency stairs where she sometimes went when she needed to think, paying attention to the sounds from her home in case her daughter woke up. She sat on the cold concrete step, finally allowing the tears to fall. She cried silently at first, then with sobs that shook her entire body. She cried for the injustice, for the fear, for the humiliation, for not knowing how to protect her daughter. She cried until she had no more tears, until only a painful emptiness remained in her chest. "Mum, if you were here, what would you do?" she asked the darkness. The echo of her own voice on the empty staircase was her only company. Eleanor remained seated on that cold step for how long she couldn't tell. Her eyes burned from crying so much, and her entire body ached from the accumulated tension of the day. The dimly lit emergency staircase was her refuge when life inside the small apartment became too suffocating. The smell of mold and damp concrete was strangely comforting in its familiarity. She hugged her own knees, making herself small as if she could disappear into that darkness. The distant sound of a siren cut through the silence of the early morning, reminding her that the city never slept, that life continued indifferent to her suffering. She was paying attention to the sounds to know if her daughter had awakened, when she heard slow steps approaching and curled up even more, not wanting to be seen in that state by any neighbor. A gentle hand touched her shoulder, and she looked up to find Donna Penelope's kind, wrinkled face. "Eleanor, my child, what are you doing here at this hour?" asked the neighbor in a soft voice. Eleanor tried to speak, but only a sob escaped her throat. Donna Penelope, without saying anything else, sat down next to Eleanor on the cold step. Her knee protested audibly, but she ignored the pain. She was dressed in a worn robe over her nightgown, and her white hair tied in a messy bun indicated that she had gotten up in a hurry. Eleanor tried to dry her face with the backs of her hands, embarrassed to be seen like this, but the tears continued to fall. Donna Penelope took a cloth handkerchief from her robe pocket and handed it to Eleanor, who accepted it gratefully. The fabric had the soft scent of lavender, the same perfume her mother used. The two women sat in silence for a few minutes, Donna Penelope respecting Eleanor's pain, waiting for her to be ready to speak. Finally, between broken sobs, Eleanor managed to tell everything: the dismissal, the money spent on Elizabeth, the eviction. "I don't know what to do anymore, Donna Penelope. I've failed my daughter," Eleanor confessed. The elderly lady shook her head firmly. "You haven't failed anyone, my child. You're doing the best you can in impossible circumstances," said Donna Penelope, her voice carrying wisdom and experience. She took Eleanor's hand between hers, noticing how cold and trembling they were. The lady continued, her gaze lost in old but still painful memories. Eleanor could see in the time-marked face that Donna Penelope understood her pain in a way few people could. The dim light of the staircase created deep shadows in the lady's wrinkles, each one telling a story of struggle and survival. 40 years ago, I was exactly where you are now. Alone with 3 small children, no job, about to be evicted, revealed Donna Penelope. Eleanor looked at her surprised. She had never heard this story before. "How did you manage to survive? asked Eleanor, her voice still hoarse from crying so much. Donna Penelope smiled, a sad but hopeful smile. She adjusted herself better on the uncomfortable step, her back complaining about the position, but she seemed determined to stay there for as long as necessary. The building was in absolute silence. Only the distant hum of the old elevator broke the quietness. Eleanor could hear her own breathing beginning to calm down, the panic giving way to a deep exhaustion. Donna Penelope squeezed her hand harder, as if she could transmit strength through touch. One day at a time, one kindness at a time. The kindness we plant always comes back, my child. Sometimes it takes time, but it comes back. Keep being who you are, advised the lady. Her voice had the authority of someone who had survived the worst and emerged on the other side. But Donna Penelope, kindness doesn't pay the rent. It doesn't put food on the table, Eleanor replied bitterly. She immediately regretted the tone, but the lady didn't seem offended. On the contrary, she nodded with understanding. Donna Penelope stood up with some difficulty, her knees audibly cracking, and extended her hand to Eleanor. The younger one accepted the help, her numb legs protesting when she stood up. When they reached Donna Penelope's floor, the lady signaled for Eleanor to follow her. The neighbor's apartment was even smaller than Eleanor's, but impeccably clean and organized. The smell of homemade food still lingered in the air. "Come, you need to eat something. It's no use facing problems on an empty stomach," insisted Donna Penelope. Eleanor wanted to protest, but her stomach growled loudly, betraying her hunger. Donna Penelope heated a plate of vegetable soup and placed it in front of Eleanor, along with a piece of homemade bread. The simple food seemed like a feast to Eleanor, who hadn't eaten anything substantial all day. While she ate, Donna Penelope went to the apartment to check if Eleanor's daughter was still sleeping, and after confirming, returned to her apartment to prepare a chamomile tea, the aromatic steam filling the small kitchen. The two women sat at the old Formica table, the comfortable silence between them. Eleanor could see old photos on the walls, young Donna Penelope with her children, all smiling despite the simple clothes. There was dignity in those images, a strength that transcended material poverty. The hot soup warmed Eleanor from within, and she felt a little strength returning. "Thank you, Donna Penelope. You didn't have to do this," Eleanor thanked. The elderly lady made a dismissive gesture with her hand. "I did need to. We women must look after each other. The world is already cruel enough to us," replied Mrs. Penelope, serving more tea for both. She went to a cabinet and returned with a small tin of homemade cookies, placing some on Eleanor's plate. The neighbor's generosity made Eleanor's eyes fill with tears again, but this time they were tears of gratitude. The two talked for some time more, Mrs. Penelope telling stories of overcoming hardship, of how she had raised her children with dignity despite poverty. They had all graduated, had good jobs now, but she chose to continue living there in that old building because that's where her memories were, her roots. Eleanor listened, fascinated, finding hope in the lady's words. "Life has its twists and turns, my child. When we think all is lost, a door opens," Mrs. Penelope philosophized. The clock on the wall marked almost 3 in the morning when Eleanor finally got up to leave. "Mrs. Penelope, thank you so much for everything. I don't know how to thank you," said Eleanor at the door. Mrs. Penelope hugged her, a maternal embrace that Eleanor hadn't received in years since her mother had passed away. The scent of lavender from the handkerchief was still there, comforting and familiar. The lady held Eleanor's face between her hands, looking into her eyes with intensity. Eleanor could see her own pain reflected in those wise eyes, but she also saw hope, determination, the certainty that she would survive. The hallway was dark and silent, and Eleanor had to suppress the urge to ask to stay there, in that welcoming apartment, protected from the cruel reality that awaited her. "You will overcome this, Eleanor. I know you will. And remember, I'm here if you need me," promised Mrs. Penelope. Eleanor nodded, unable to speak because of the lump in her throat. Eleanor returned to her apartment feeling a little stronger. She checked on Luna, who continued sleeping deeply, oblivious to the approaching storm. She lay down beside her daughter without changing her clothes, embracing her gently. The warmth of Luna's little body was comforting, and Eleanor fell asleep lulled by the girl's regular breathing. Her dreams were disturbed, full of images of eviction, of Luna crying, of cold and dark streets. She woke up several times in panic, checking if Luna was still there, if they were still at home. When the sun finally rose, painting the room with golden light through the torn curtain, Eleanor had barely rested at all. But a new day meant a new chance, and she needed to believe that. "Today I will find a solution. Today everything will change," she murmured to herself. Luna stirred beside her, beginning to wake up. "Good morning, my love," said Eleanor, forcing a smile when Luna opened her eyes. The girl stretched like a kitten, yawning widely before hugging her mother. Eleanor returned the hug, smelling her daughter's hair that had that unique scent of a child, a mixture of cheap shampoo and innocence. Luna got up excitedly, running to the bathroom. Eleanor followed her, helping with the morning routine, brushing teeth, washing face, combing hair. Each everyday gesture seemed precious now that she knew it could be one of the last in that apartment. While making the special braid she had promised for physical education class, Eleanor fought against tears. Luna chatted about school, about friends, completely unaware of the drama unfolding around her. "Mommy, today the teacher is going to teach a new song. Can I sing it for you when I come back?" Luna asked excitedly. Eleanor confirmed with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. In the kitchen, Eleanor opened the refrigerator knowing what she would find, practically nothing. There was some rice left from dinner and an egg. She prepared scrambled eggs for Luna, putting all the rice on her daughter's plate. For herself, just a glass of water. Luna ate without noticing that her mother wasn't eating, too busy telling about her dream of unicorns and rainbows. When Luna finished, she picked up her backpack and waited for Eleanor at the door. The routine of leaving her with Mrs. Penelope continued as normal, the neighbor not mentioning the early morning conversation in front of the child. Eleanor kissed Luna and promised to pick her up later, even without knowing if she could keep the promise. "Mommy, can I have a glass of milk with bread when I come back from school?" Luna asked innocently. Eleanor felt her heart break into 1,000 pieces. "I'll manage it, my love, Mommy promises," replied Eleanor, the lie burning in her throat. She left the building quickly before Luna could see the tears that threatened to fall. On the street, the morning movement had already begun. Hurried people going to work, uniformed children on their way to school, life following its normal course. Eleanor straightened her shoulders and began her marathon. First, she went to the corner bakery where she had known the owner for years. The man greeted her with friendliness, but when she asked about employment, he shook his head negatively. Business was slow. He could barely keep the 2 employees he had. Eleanor thanked him and left, the smell of fresh bread making her empty stomach ache. The next stop was the market 2 blocks ahead. "I'm sorry, we're not hiring," said the manager without even looking at her. The morning continued like this, one rejection after another. Eleanor traveled throughout the neighborhood, entering every store, every restaurant, every commercial establishment she found. In some places, they wouldn't even let her finish speaking. In others, they took her name and phone number, promising to call if something came up, but Eleanor knew these were empty promises. The sun rose in the sky, the heat increased, and she kept walking. Her feet hurt in old shoes. Sweat ran down her back, but she couldn't stop. She tried a beauty salon, a clothing store, even an auto repair shop. The answer was always the same. There were no vacancies. By noon, she had walked miles and was exhausted. She sat on a park bench, searching for money in her pockets. She had spent everything on fare to try for a job further away. "How will I buy milk and bread for Luna with this and still save for emergencies? How will I feed us?" she thought desperately. A pigeon pecked at crumbs near her feet, and Eleanor envied the simplicity of that life. In the afternoon, Eleanor expanded her search to the city's commercial center. The stores were larger there, more movement, more opportunities, or so she hoped. She entered a large fast food chain, the smell of frying making her hunger worse. The manager, a young woman in an impeccable uniform, looked her up and down before responding. Eleanor knew her appearance didn't help. Wrinkled clothes, haggard face, desperation evident in every gesture. Even so, she tried to present herself in the best possible way, emphasizing her experience, her dedication, her need. The manager said she would review the resume Eleanor had handwritten on a notebook page, but her eyes already said the paper would go straight to the trash. "We'll contact you if there's interest," the manager politely lied. Eleanor left knowing the phone would never ring. The hours passed and desperation grew. Eleanor tried hotels, offices, even a private school that needed a cleaning assistant. Everywhere, the same negative response. Some were polite, others not so much. A restaurant manager laughed when she said she needed to start immediately. Another dismissed her as soon as he saw she had no experience with customer service. The sun was beginning to set when Eleanor finally accepted the day's defeat. She had traveled the entire city, her feet were raw, and she had achieved nothing. 0 opportunities, 0 hope. She began the journey home with slow steps, each one more difficult than the last. I failed again. Luna is waiting for milk and bread, and I have nothing, she muttered to herself. Store windows displayed abundance she could never reach. It was almost 8 in the evening when Eleanor passed in front of Thompson's restaurant, a luxurious establishment that occupied an entire corner in the upscale neighborhood. The glass windows showed the elegant interior, tables with white tablecloths, well-dressed customers enjoying meals that cost more than Eleanor earned in a week. She stopped for a moment, hypnotized by that world to which she would never belong. The aroma of well-seasoned food escaped through the doors when someone entered or left, making her empty stomach painfully contract. That's when she saw movement in the side alley, an employee in kitchen uniform pushing a cart full of boxes toward the trash containers. Eleanor watched as he threw box after box into the trash, perfectly packaged products being discarded. Her heart raced when she saw a milk carton among the items. The employee went back inside, and Eleanor stood there, fighting against all her instincts. My God, what am I thinking? A mother taking food from the trash? How far have I fallen? She thought frantically. Her hands trembled just considering the possibility. Eleanor took 2 steps toward the alley and stopped. The image of Luna asking for milk in the morning cut through her mind like a blade. She took a few more steps and stopped again, her stomach churning not from hunger, but from disgust with herself for having failed her daughter. Her parents had been poor, but never, never had they needed to do this. She was failing at a level she never thought possible. The tears began to form as she struggled against the need and horror of what she was about to do. Luna will wake up hungry tomorrow. I have nothing to give her, she reminded herself. The internal battle was heartbreaking, pride and dignity on one side, maternal love on the other. She approached the container with hesitant steps, each one more difficult than the last. The smell of food mixed with garbage hit her, making her stomach turn. With trembling hands, she lifted the lid and looked inside. The milk cartons were there, on top of other debris. She reached out her hand and stopped mid-air, the reality of the moment hitting her with full force. I'm taking food from the garbage. I, Eleanor, who has always worked honestly, am taking food from the garbage for my daughter, she whispered to herself, tears now flowing freely. But the alternative was Luna going to school hungry, seeing her little face disappointed when there was no breakfast. With a choked sob, she took the milk carton. It was damp from some unidentified liquid in the container, and she had to fight against the urge to vomit. She checked the expiration date. It would expire tomorrow, but she knew it would still be good for a few days if kept sealed. Still, fear gnawed at her. What if it made Luna sick? What if her daughter became ill because of her inability to provide adequately? What kind of mother was she who had to risk her daughter's health like this? She found some packaged bread that seemed to have been discarded only because it was from the previous day. She picked them up with trembling fingers, each movement a stab to her maternal pride. A mother should buy fresh bread for her daughter, not take it from the garbage. A mother should provide, protect, not subject her child to this. Forgive me, Luna. Mommy is doing the best she can, she cried softly, while selecting what seemed safest. Each item she placed in the torn bag she had found was another weight on her conscience. The fruits were bruised but still edible, darkened bananas, apples with soft spots. Eleanor examined them under the dim light, trying to determine if they were safe. The fear of giving Luna something spoiled was paralyzing. But the alternative was having nothing, sending Luna to school on an empty stomach, completely failing as a mother. Her hands were shaking so much she almost dropped an apple. What example am I setting? What would Luna think if she knew where the food came from? She mentally tortured herself. The humiliation was so intense it felt physical, a pain in her chest that made breathing difficult. As she tied the bag, Eleanor made desperate promises to herself. This was temporary, just this once, never again. Tomorrow she would find a job, any job. She would do anything. Clean bathrooms, wash dishes, anything rather than subject Luna to this again. The weight of the bag in her hands was nothing compared to the weight on her soul. She had crossed a line she never imagined crossing, descended to a level of desperation she hadn't contemplated, even in her worst nightmares. I'm a terrible mother. Luna deserved someone better, she thought, as she prepared to leave. The sound of an approaching motor made her shrink into the shadows, the fear of being seen in that degrading situation making her heart race. It was at that moment, completely consumed by shame and fear, focused only on getting away as quickly as possible, that Eleanor didn't notice the movement in the street. She didn't see the limousine slowing down, didn't notice Elizabeth's anxious face pressed against the glass, didn't perceive Grayson trying to understand what his mother was pointing at. Her mind was in a whirlwind of self-deprecation and despair. She adjusted the bag against her body, checked if the milk wasn't leaking, if the fruits wouldn't fall. Each second there was an eternity of humiliation. I need to leave, I need to get out of here, she repeated mentally as she began to quickly move away from the place. Tears blurred her vision, but she knew the way by heart. Grayson Thompson adjusted his tie while reviewing the day's latest reports on his tablet. At 35, he had built an empire of restaurants that had started with his grandfather's small Italian establishment. His fingers slid across the screen, checking numbers, profit margins, new investments. The business dinner had been productive, another acquisition in progress, another expansion guaranteed. Beside him, his mother Elizabeth looked out the window with that vacant gaze that had become common in recent months. Alzheimer's was advancing slowly but relentlessly, stealing from her the memories Grayson cherished most. He put away the tablet and gently held her hand. Elizabeth turned to him and smiled, that sweet smile that still made him feel like the little boy she used to comfort after nightmares. We're going home, Mom. Soon you'll be in your warm bed, he said lovingly. She nodded, but he knew she probably didn't fully understand where she was or where they were going. It was when they were passing by his main restaurant that Elizabeth suddenly became agitated. Grayson was checking his phone for messages when he felt his mother's hand grip his arm with surprising strength. She was leaning forward, her face practically pressed against the glass, her eyes wide and alert in a way he hadn't seen in weeks. Elizabeth tapped on the window with her palm, small guttural sounds escaping her throat as she tried to form words. Grayson followed her gaze and saw only a dark alley beside his restaurant, dimly lit by a faulty lamp. There was a figure there, someone rummaging through what appeared to be garbage, but it was too dark to distinguish details. What is it, Mother? What are you seeing? He asked worriedly. Elizabeth turned to him, tears streaming down her wrinkled face. The girl, the kind girl. She's there, Grayson. It's her. Elizabeth shouted with a clarity that surprised him. Her hands trembled as she frantically pointed to the alley. Grayson tried to get a better look, but the figure was already moving away, carrying what appeared to be a bag. He couldn't see the face, just a silhouette moving in the shadows. Elizabeth began to bang on the window harder, trying to get attention, but the soundproof glass of the limousine muffled any sound. Grayson quickly touched the intercom to speak with the driver. Jorge, stop the car. I need to check something, he ordered. But at that moment the traffic light changed and a symphony of horns exploded behind them. Jorge, an experienced professional, knew that stopping there would cause a traffic jam. Sir, I can't stop here. I can circle around the block, the driver suggested. Grayson agreed, but when they returned minutes later, the alley was empty. Elizabeth was crying now, deep sobs that broke Grayson's heart. She held his face between her hands, trying to make him understand something vital. In her lucid moments, she often mentioned a girl who had helped her, but the details were always confused, mixed with other memories. Grayson was never sure what was real and what was confusion from the disease, but something in her intensity now, the absolute certainty in her eyes, made him believe. It was her son, the girl who saved me when I was lost. She was taking food from the trash. From the trash, Grayson, Elizabeth repeated, the anguish clear in her voice. Grayson hugged his mother, trying to calm her, while his mind worked. If it was true, if it was the same person who had helped his mother, why would she be taking food from the trash? "We'll find her, Mother. I promise we'll find her," he promised. Elizabeth calmed down a little, leaning against him. Meanwhile, Eleanor walked quickly through the dark streets, completely unaware of the drama she had left behind. Her mind was focused only on getting home, on preparing something for Luna to eat in the morning. The bag weighed in her arms, but it was a welcome weight, the weight of hope even if temporary. When she finally reached the building, she ran up the stairs, anxious to store everything before anyone saw her. She had no idea that at that moment across town, Grayson was already making calls, mobilizing his security team to review the restaurant's cameras. "Find this woman. I need to know who she is and where she lives," he ordered over the phone. The determination in his voice was the same he used to close million-dollar deals. Eleanor entered her apartment and went straight to the kitchen. She carefully washed the fruit, checked the milk. It was still good, as she had suspected. She stored everything with care, already imagining Luna's smile in the morning. She was so tired she could barely stand, but the relief of having managed to get something to feed her daughter kept her moving. That's when she saw the eviction notice still on the table, reminding her that this small victory was only temporary. In less than 24 hours, they would have to leave everything. She sat heavily in the chair, reality hitting her again like a cold wave. "One problem at a time, Eleanor. At least tomorrow Luna will have breakfast," she said to herself. She didn't imagine that her life was about to change in ways she could never predict. Across town, Grayson was in his home office, even though it was almost midnight. He had called the restaurant manager, the head of security, even the building's janitor. The security cameras had captured a woman in the alley, but the angle didn't clearly show her face. All he had was a vague description: tied-back brown hair, simple clothes, medium height. It could be anyone among thousands of women in the city, but Grayson hadn't gotten where he was by giving up easily. He enlarged the images, looked for other angles, checked the street cameras. Elizabeth had fallen asleep on the couch in his office, refusing to go to the bedroom. Even while sleeping, she mumbled about the kind young woman. "I'll find her, Mother. And I'll repay the kindness she showed you," Grayson promised quietly. He wouldn't rest until he fulfilled that promise. Morning arrived gray and cold, with heavy clouds promising rain. Eleanor had slept on the couch, unable to relax enough to lie in bed. Every noise in the building made her startle, expecting the landlord with the police for the eviction at any moment. It was 6 in the morning when she finally got up, her whole body aching from tension and the uncomfortable position. She went to the kitchen and looked at Luna still sleeping. How would she explain that she had nothing for breakfast? The girl had specifically asked for milk with bread, and Eleanor had promised. Last night's empty words now weighed like lead. She looked at the bag with items from the trash, but couldn't force herself to use them. The fear of making Luna sick, the humiliation of feeding her daughter food from the garbage, all of this paralyzed her. When Luna woke up and came to the kitchen hopeful, Eleanor had to gather all her strength to speak. "My love, the milk is gone, but as soon as Mommy gets some money, I'll buy it for you, okay?" Eleanor lied. Luna made a sad face but nodded bravely. Eleanor found some remnants of coffee powder in the cupboard and made a weak cup of coffee with sugar for Luna, pretending it was special hot chocolate. She found some water crackers at the bottom of a tin, brittle and old, but still edible. It was all she could offer. Luna ate without complaining, but Eleanor could see the disappointment in her little eyes. The child was trying to be strong to not make her mother sad, and that broke Eleanor's heart even more. While Luna ate the dry crackers, Eleanor fought against tears. In a few hours they wouldn't even have this, they wouldn't even have a roof. The small and humble apartment that was their home would be taken, and they would be on the street. How had she reached this point? How had she failed so completely to protect her daughter? "Mom, it's okay, I like crackers with coffee," said Luna, trying to cheer her up. Eleanor hugged her daughter tightly, hiding her face in her hair so she wouldn't see the tears. After the improvised breakfast, Eleanor helped Luna get ready for school. The daily ritual continued, even with the world crumbling around them. She made the braids she had promised, even with her hands trembling. The uniform was clean and ironed. The shoes with the sole coming unstuck were disguised with white glue that still remained. Every detail was important to maintain normalcy, to protect Luna from the brutal truth for as long as possible. While arranging her daughter's backpack, Eleanor wondered if she should send her to school or keep her at home. But going to school meant Luna would have lunch there, at least one guaranteed meal. The decision was made. She took Luna to Donna Penelope, who received them with evident concern on her face. The lady knew about the eviction, Eleanor had told her the night before. "Go do what you need to do, dear. Luna is safe with me," whispered Donna Penelope. Eleanor kissed her daughter and left quickly before she broke down. Back in the empty apartment, Eleanor began to organize the few belongings into piles. She didn't have boxes or suitcases, just some old plastic bags. Luna's clothes were folded with care, each little piece a memory. The drawings that the girl had made and that decorated the refrigerator were carefully stored between the pages of an old notebook. The few toys, mostly donations or found on sales, were cleaned and organized. Eleanor worked mechanically, her mind trying not to process the reality of what she was doing. It was almost 8 in the morning when she heard strong knocks on the door. Her heart raced. It was too early for the eviction, the landlord had said, 10 at night, but maybe he had changed his mind. Maybe he wanted to get it over with quickly. With trembling legs, she went to the door. "I'm already packing things. Please give me a few more hours," she shouted before even opening. When she finally opened, the surprise left her speechless. Grayson Thompson was standing at her door, impeccable in a suit that probably cost more than Eleanor earned in a year. Next to him, supported by his arm, was Elizabeth. The elderly lady had tears in her eyes and a radiant smile on her face. Before Eleanor could say anything, Elizabeth let go of her son's arm and hugged her with surprising strength. The expensive perfume scent of the lady contrasted with the humble environment of the apartment, but the hug was genuine, warm, full of gratitude. Eleanor stood paralyzed, not understanding what was happening, how they had found her, what they wanted there. Elizabeth moved away a little, holding Eleanor's face between her wrinkled but well-cared-for hands. "We found you. My angel, we finally found you," exclaimed Elizabeth with a choked voice. Eleanor looked at Grayson, seeking explanations, and found a gaze that mixed determination and something that seemed to be admiration. "Sorry to appear like this without warning, but my mother gave me no peace all night. We needed to find you," explained Grayson, his deep and controlled voice contrasting with Elizabeth's evident emotion. Eleanor took a step back, suddenly conscious of her appearance. Wrinkled clothes from sleeping on the couch, disheveled hair, eyes swollen from crying. The apartment behind her clearly showed signs of poverty and imminent eviction, with things piled up and bare walls where the few pictures had been removed. Shame consumed her, especially when she remembered that Grayson had probably seen her in the garbage the night before. How had he found her? Why was he there? Elizabeth continued holding her hands, squeezing them affectionately, murmuring confused but sincere thanks. "Mother, let's go inside to talk better," suggested Grayson. Eleanor hesitated, but eventually moved aside to let them in. The contrast between the elegant visitors and the humble apartment was striking. Grayson had to stoop slightly to pass through the door, and his Italian shoes seemed completely out of place on the old, creaking wooden floor. Elizabeth, however, seemed to notice none of this, her eyes focused only on Eleanor. They sat on the old sofa, the upholstery sinking under the weight. Eleanor remained standing, arms crossed defensively over her chest, waiting. Grayson cleared his throat before beginning, choosing his words carefully. His posture was professional, but there was something softer in his eyes. "I spent all night looking for you. The restaurant cameras caught a woman in the alley, but we couldn't see the face clearly. I reviewed all the street camera footage, cross-referenced information, until a security camera from a store clearly showed you 2 days ago helping my mother," he explained. Eleanor felt her blood freeze. He knew about the garbage. "I know you spent everything you had on my mother's medicine. The pharmacist told me you had $350, paid $320 for the medicine," continued Grayson, his voice becoming softer. Eleanor lowered her head, humiliation burning. He knew everything, her dismissal, her foolish sacrifice, her fall to rock bottom. Tears began to form, but she blinked quickly to push them away. She wouldn't cry in front of them, wouldn't humiliate herself even more. Elizabeth got up with some difficulty and went to Eleanor, taking her hands again. The elderly woman had moments of confusion, but now her eyes were clear and focused. You didn't know me, I was just an old woman lost on the street. But you stopped. You gave everything you had without expecting anything, said Elizabeth with a firm voice. Eleanor tried to pull her hands away, but the lady held firmly. The kindness you planted that day. Now it's time to harvest, continued Elizabeth, and Eleanor finally raised her eyes, confused. Grayson also stood up, taking an envelope from the inside pocket of his suit. Eleanor instinctively backed away. She didn't want handouts, didn't want charity. She had humiliated herself enough. But Grayson didn't extend the envelope, just held it while speaking. His voice now had the tone of someone making a business proposal, professional and serious. I'm not here to offer charity, Eleanor. I'm here to make a job proposal. My restaurant chain is starting a social program for food reuse. I need someone to coordinate it. Someone who understands real hunger, true need, he said. Eleanor looked at him in disbelief, certain that she had misunderstood. I saw you last night in the alley. I know what you're going through, admitted Grayson, and Eleanor felt her face burn with shame. He had seen her at her lowest moment, picking food from the garbage like an animal. Tears now flowed freely. She could no longer contain them. How could she coordinate anything when she couldn't even take care of herself? Elizabeth hugged her again, and Eleanor allowed herself to cry on the elderly woman's shoulder. Between sobs, she tried to speak, explain, apologize, but the words wouldn't come. Grayson continued, his voice firm but gentle. You have dignity, Eleanor. Even in desperation, you chose to help my mother. That says everything about your character, he affirmed. Eleanor shook her head, unable to accept any compliment. It's charity. You feel sorry for me, Eleanor managed to say between tears. Grayson shook his head, his face serious. He opened the envelope and took out a formal contract, several pages printed on company letterhead. It wasn't a charity check, it was a real job offer with all specifications: position, salary, benefits, responsibilities. Eleanor took the papers with trembling hands, her eyes quickly scanning the words. The salary was more than she had ever earned, including health insurance for her and Luna, food vouchers, transportation allowance. It was real, not a dream. I need someone with integrity, someone who understands both sides, waste and need. You are perfect for the position, Grayson insisted. Elizabeth nodded vigorously, squeezing Eleanor's arm. But I don't have qualifications, I don't have education, Eleanor argued weakly, still unable to believe it. Her hands trembled holding the contract, the printed words dancing before her tired eyes. How could she coordinate a social program? She was just a cleaner, a desperate mother who had taken food from the trash the night before. Inadequacy weighed on her shoulders like a lead cloak. Grayson shrugged, a surprisingly casual gesture for someone so formal. His eyes showed a determination that Eleanor recognized. It was the same she had when fighting for Luna. He leaned forward, his hands interlaced over his knees, the posture of someone about to reveal something important. Do you know how many business graduates I have in the company? Dozens. Do you know how many truly understand what it's like to go hungry? None, he said firmly. Eleanor looked at him surprised, still not understanding where he was going. You have something more important. Real experience, genuine empathy, and proven integrity. The rest can be learned, Grayson continued, his eyes never leaving hers. Eleanor wanted to protest again, to list all the reasons why she wasn't qualified, but he gently raised his hand to interrupt her. There was something in his expression, an absolute conviction that made her pause. Elizabeth squeezed her hand encouragingly, and Eleanor could feel the warmth and support of the elderly lady. Grayson took another paper from his inside pocket, carefully unfolding it. It was an official document with seals and signatures. When I started looking for you, I discovered something interesting. This building where you live belongs to one of the companies in my group, Thompson Holdings. It was acquired 3 years ago as an investment, but I didn't even know about its condition, explained Grayson, a shadow of irritation crossing his face. Eleanor felt the air leave her lungs. The administrator I hired has been charging abusive rents and carrying out summary evictions without my knowledge. I discovered this morning when I investigated your address, continued Grayson, now with clear indignation in his voice. He showed the document to Eleanor. It was an order cancelling all evictions in the building and freezing rents. From now on, you owe nothing. And the rent will be adjusted to a fair value. 30% of what you were paying, he declared with authority. Eleanor had to sit down, her weak legs no longer supporting her. The old sofa creaked under her weight, and she covered her face with her hands, unable to process so many turns of events. Eleanor looked at him without being able to fully process the information. The building was his? The eviction was cancelled? This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen in real life, not to people like her. Her entire life had been a sequence of closed doors, denied opportunities, endless struggles. Now, suddenly, everything was changing. It was too much to believe. Elizabeth sat beside her on the sunken sofa, running her hand through her hair in a maternal gesture that made Eleanor remember her own mother. The lady's occasional confusion had completely disappeared, and she was lucid and present, her clear blue eyes focused. "My child, I know it's hard to believe when life has only been cruel. But sometimes, just sometimes, the universe repays kindness," Elizabeth said in a soft voice. Her wrinkled but well-cared-for hands held Eleanor's with comforting firmness. "When you helped me, you didn't know who I was. You expected nothing in return. You saw only a lost and frightened old woman and chose to spend everything you had to help me. That kind of kindness is rare, my child. So rare that when we find it, we need to value it," continued Elizabeth, tears forming in her eyes. Grayson observed the interaction between the two women with a softened expression. Eleanor could see that he deeply loved his mother, that seeing her lucid and happy meant everything to him. Elizabeth took Eleanor's face between her hands, looking intensely into her eyes. "You gave me dignity when I was lost. You treated me like a human being when I didn't even know who I was. Now it's our turn," the elderly woman stated with conviction. Eleanor couldn't stop the tears that ran down her face. "But Mrs. Elizabeth, I didn't do anything special." "Anyone would have helped," Eleanor protested weakly. Elizabeth and Grayson exchanged a glance, and Grayson shook his head negatively. He stood up and walked to the small window, looking at the busy street below. His back was tense, and when he turned, Eleanor saw a vulnerability in his face that she didn't expect from someone so powerful. "No, Eleanor. Not everyone would have helped. Do you know how many people passed by my mother that day before you? Dozens. I saw it on the street security cameras. Everyone avoided her, some even crossed to the other sidewalk," he revealed, his voice heavy with contained emotion. Eleanor heard a noise coming from the bedroom and panicked. Was Luna home? But it was just the wind hitting the window she had forgotten open, the old curtains dancing with the breeze. Grayson continued, now walking around the small living room space, his hands gesturing as he spoke. "You didn't just help. You spent your last cent, accompanied my mother, made sure she drank water, ate something, took her medicine. The pharmacist told me you checked 3 times if the medications were correct, asked about interactions, about dosage. You cared for her as if she were your own mother," he said, gratitude evident in every word. Eleanor remembered that moment, the concern to ensure she was doing everything right, that the lady would be okay. It hadn't been heroism, just basic humanity, or so she thought. "And then you disappeared, didn't wait for a reward, didn't even leave your name. That, Eleanor, is character," Grayson concluded. Elizabeth nodded vigorously beside her. "My son spent the whole night looking for you. He didn't sleep, mobilized the entire security team, reviewed hours of footage. Do you know why?" asked Elizabeth, squeezing Eleanor's hand. The lady paused, looking at her son with evident pride before continuing. "Because I couldn't stop talking about the kind woman. Even in my moments of confusion, I remembered you. So your face was the only clear thing in my clouded mind," Elizabeth revealed. Eleanor looked between mother and son, finally beginning to understand the dimension of what she had done without knowing. "My daughter. She'll be back from school for lunch and I don't have—" Eleanor began, a new wave of despair hitting her. Grayson looked at the expensive watch on his wrist and made a signal to someone who was apparently waiting in the hallway. An assistant appeared at the door, and Grayson murmured some instructions. The man nodded and disappeared. "Solved. Lunch will arrive in 30 minutes. Complete groceries for the week will arrive in an hour," said Grayson, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. Eleanor looked at him open-mouthed, unable to form words. This had to be a dream, a delusion caused by stress. "The job starts today if you accept. "I need an answer now because there's a lot of work to do," said Grayson, extending a pen to Eleanor. She looked at the contract, at the pen, at Elizabeth, who smiled encouragingly, at Grayson, who waited patiently. Her hands were shaking so much she could barely hold the pen. Her whole life had been a struggle, one day after another of difficulties and sacrifices. Now a door was opening, but the fear that it was too good to be true paralyzed her. "What if I fail? What if I'm not good enough?" she asked in a small voice. Grayson knelt in front of her, coming to eye level. "You won't fail. Do you know why? Because you know what it is to need. You know what hunger is. You know what despair is. You'll treat each family we help as if it were your own," said Grayson with conviction. It was the last straw. Eleanor broke down in deep sobs, all the fear, all the tension, all the despair of the last few days coming out in waves of crying. Elizabeth hugged her from one side, and surprisingly, Grayson took her hand from the other side, gently squeezing in support. She cried until she had no more tears, until only an emptiness remained that slowly began to fill with something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The sound of hurried steps on the stairs made her raise her head. Donna Penelope appeared at the door with Luna, both breathless from the quick climb. The neighbor had seen the commotion and brought the girl home. Luna ran to Eleanor, concerned about her mother's tears. Eleanor hugged her tight, very tight, smelling her hair, feeling her small and perfect warmth. Elizabeth approached and caressed Luna's face with tenderness. "Your mother is an angel, little one. A real angel," said the elderly woman. Luna smiled shyly, not fully understanding but feeling that something important was happening. "Luna, this is Mr. Grayson and Mrs. Elizabeth. They came to offer Mother a job," Eleanor explained, with a voice hoarse from crying. Luna widened her eyes and clapped her little hands. The child's innocence and pure joy broke the tension in the room. Grayson stood up and extended his hand to Luna in a formal greeting that made the girl laugh. "Pleasure to meet you, Miss Luna," he said seriously. Luna shook his hand with her tiny hands, delighted with the adult treatment. "Do you have a job for my mom? She's the best mom in the world," declared Luna. Everyone laughed. Even Grayson showed a genuine smile. Eleanor finally signed the contract, her signature shaky but determined on the paper. Grayson put away the document and took another paper from his pocket, a salary advance for immediate expenses, according to him. Eleanor tried to refuse, but Elizabeth was firm. "It's payment for work, not charity. You start today, you need to be presentable and fed," said the lady with maternal authority. Eleanor accepted, her hands still trembling. It was more money than she had seen in months. "The office is on the ground floor of the main restaurant. Report at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. My assistant will be waiting to guide you," instructed Grayson, returning to his professional tone. He stood up to leave, helping Elizabeth to rise. At the door, Elizabeth turned once more and hugged Eleanor for a long time. "Thank you for saving me that day. Now it's my turn to return the favor," whispered the elderly woman. Grayson nodded to Eleanor, a respectful gesture between equals, not from boss to employee. When they left, Eleanor stood in the middle of the room, still not completely believing it. Luna jumped around her, asking questions, excited about the news. Donna Penelope, who had watched everything from the door, came in and hugged Eleanor. "I told you kindness comes back, my child," the neighbor reminded her with tears in her eyes. Eleanor looked at the check in her hands, at the contract on the table, at Luna dancing with joy. "Everything will be all right, my love. Everything will be all right," whispered Eleanor, and for the first time in a long time, she believed it. 6 months later, the morning sun came through the wide windows of the Thompson Solidarity Distribution Center, illuminating the organized shelves and industrial refrigerators that hummed softly. Eleanor walked through the space with confident steps, checking every detail of the operation she had helped build from scratch. Her blue uniform with the foundation logo was impeccable. The badge with her name and position hung around her neck with pride. The volunteers were beginning to arrive, greeting her warmly as they prepared for another day of work. The center served an average of 50 families per day, transforming what would otherwise be wasted into dignity and hope. Eleanor stopped in front of the scheduling board, checking the names of the families who would come to pick up their baskets. Each name had a story. Each family had their struggles, and Eleanor knew them all. "Good morning, Eleanor. Did the lady from the family in apartment 300 confirm she's coming today?" asked a young volunteer. Eleanor checked her spreadsheet and confirmed with a welcoming smile. The center had become much more than a food distribution site. It was a welcoming space where people were treated with respect and dignity. Eleanor had insisted on this from the beginning. No humiliating lines, no judgments, just help offered with care. Families were served at scheduled times, could choose items according to their needs and preferences, and there was always someone available to talk if they needed. The system that Eleanor had developed was efficient but human, practical but compassionate. She checked the stock of fresh products that had arrived from restaurants the night before. Fruits, vegetables, breads, dairy, all perfectly good, but that wouldn't be used due to small aesthetic defects or proximity to expiration date. While organizing the donations into categories, she heard the familiar sound of hurried footsteps. It was one of the mothers served by the program, her face red and eyes swollen from crying. "Eleanor, I need to talk to you." "It's urgent," said the woman between sobs. Eleanor immediately led her to the private room she used for special cases. The woman's name was Rosa, mother of 3 children, and had been coming to the center for 2 months. Eleanor served a glass of water and sat beside her, waiting for her to calm down enough to speak. Rosa worked as a house cleaner, but had lost 2 of her steady jobs when one employer moved away and another decided to cut expenses. The husband had abandoned the family a year ago, leaving her alone with the children. Eleanor knew this story well. It was too similar to her own. Rosa finally managed to speak between tears, pulling a crumpled paper from her purse. It was an eviction notice, identical to the one Eleanor had received 6 months ago. The landlord demanded 2 months of overdue rent within 48 hours, or the family would be put on the street. Eleanor felt her stomach tighten, the memories of that terrible night coming back with full force. "I don't know what to do, Eleanor. I have nowhere to go with the children. The youngest has asthma. He needs his medicine. I can't let him sleep on the street," Rosa cried desperately. Eleanor hugged the woman, her mind already working on possible solutions. Eleanor took her phone and started making calls. First to the company's legal department, checking Rosa's rights and legal possibilities, then to Grayson, explaining the situation and asking for guidance. He authorized her to use the emergency fund of the program for extreme cases, but Eleanor knew this was just a bandage. The problem was systemic, and she had been realizing this more and more. Many families they served were always on the verge of eviction, always one late paycheck away from the street. While Rosa calmed down, Eleanor developed a plan. She managed to negotiate with the landlord through the foundation's lawyer, paying 1 month and installments for the other. She also enrolled Rosa in the housing assistance program she was trying to implement. But she knew she needed something bigger, more structured. "I won't let you be evicted, Rosa. I promise we'll find a solution," Eleanor assured. The gratitude in the woman's eyes was a mirror of what Eleanor had felt 6 months ago. Luna arrived at the center after school, as she did every afternoon. At 7.5 years old, she had grown a few inches, and her new uniform fit perfectly. The girl ran to hug Eleanor, proudly showing the drawing she had made in art class. It was the distribution center, with Eleanor smiling at the door. Luna's transformation had been remarkable. It wasn't just the new uniform or the complete school supplies. It was the confidence, the carefree joy of a child who felt secure. She greeted the volunteers by name, helped organize some smaller boxes, and even talked a bit with Rosa, showing her drawings. Eleanor watched her daughter with pride, remembering the frightened girl who tried to be strong so as not to worry her mother. "Mom, can I help deliver the baskets today?" Luna asked hopefully. Eleanor hugged her daughter, this little angel who had been her strength in the darkest moments. The meeting with the restaurant managers was scheduled for 3 o'clock, and Eleanor had spent the previous night preparing her presentation. She entered the conference room of the main restaurant with her document folder and tablet, finding faces that weren't always friendly. Some managers respected her, others clearly saw her as a necessary nuisance to please the boss. Grayson was seated at the head of the table, Elizabeth by his side on one of her lucid days. The elderly lady smiled encouragingly at Eleanor, who took a deep breath and began her presentation. The numbers were impressive. In 6 months, they had served more than 3,000 families, prevented the waste of tons of food, and most importantly, created a support network that went beyond food. Eleanor showed Graf's testimonials, before and after photos of families served. "This is very nice, Eleanor, but it's costing the company a fortune," interrupted one of the managers, a middle-aged fat man. Eleanor had prepared for this objection. "Actually, Mr. Roberto, the program has reduced our waste disposal costs by 40%. Furthermore, the image return for the company has been incalculable," Eleanor responded, showing the positive media coverage and the increase in customers at participating restaurants. Manager Roberto, a 50-year-old man with graying hair and a prominent belly, visibly rolled his eyes. He flipped through the papers with disdain, not even bothering to read the carefully compiled data. Eleanor knew him well. She had cleaned his office for 2 years, heard his arrogant phone conversations, seen how he treated employees he considered inferior. Another manager, a thin woman with glasses, shook her head skeptically. She leaned over to whisper something in Roberto's ear, and they both chuckled, a sound that made Eleanor's stomach tighten. Eleanor knew each of these people, had studied their objections, prepared answers for each argument, but nothing had prepared her for the cruelty that would come. "These numbers are fanciful. Anyone can manipulate statistics," said the woman with glasses with a condescending smile. Eleanor maintained her composure, even as she felt her face burn. But the most resistant manager, Roberto, responsible for the main unit, decided to attack where he knew it would hurt. He leaned back in his leather chair, interlaced his fingers over his belly, and studied her like a predator evaluating its prey. Eleanor could see the sadistic pleasure in his eyes, the satisfaction of having power over someone who was once invisible to him. "Let's get serious here, gentlemen. Are we really taking seriously a presentation made by someone who 6 months ago was scrubbing our bathrooms?" he began, his voice loaded with venom. Some managers lowered their eyes, uncomfortable, but no one contradicted him. Roberto continued, now standing up for dramatic effect. "Eleanor, I remember you. Remember when you spilled coffee on my desk and took half an hour to clean it because you didn't know how to use the right product? And now you want to manage millions in resources?" he questioned with a cruel laugh. Eleanor felt tears burning her eyes, but refused to let them fall. "You don't have a degree in business administration, Eleanor. In fact, you didn't even finish high school, did you? I read your file," Roberto continued, now walking around the table like a lawyer interrogating a witness. He stopped behind her chair, forcing her to turn uncomfortably to face him. Eleanor could smell his expensive perfume, the same one she had smelled so many times while cleaning his office after he had left. "How can we entrust a program of this size to someone who 6 months ago was a janitor? Someone who doesn't know the difference between a balance sheet and a shopping list," he said, contempt dripping from every word. The humiliation was public, intentional, designed to break Eleanor in front of everyone. "And there's more," Roberto continued, clearly enjoying her suffering. "I found out some interesting things about you, Eleanor. You were fired from your last job, weren't you? And you were about to be evicted when Grayson found you. A desperate mother who would accept anything," he said, the words cutting like razors. Eleanor felt her entire body tremble, shame and anger fighting inside her. How did he know these details? Had he investigated her life? "I imagine it must be difficult for you to understand," Roberto now addressed the other managers. "But some people simply weren't born to lead. They were born to serve, to clean up others' messes. And there's nothing wrong with that as long as everyone knows their place," he declared. The silence in the room was deafening until Elizabeth hit the table with surprising force. "And you know what's most pathetic?" Roberto wasn't finished, completely ignoring Elizabeth. "It's seeing someone try to be what they're not. You can dress Eleanor in nice clothes, you can give her a fancy title, but at the end of the day she remains the same desperate woman who was." He paused for effect, a cruel smile on his lips. "Taking food from the trash behind our restaurant." The final blow had been delivered. Eleanor felt the air leave her lungs, the room spin. He knew about the most humiliating night of her life. Some managers audibly gasped, others looked away, clearly uncomfortable with the excessive cruelty. Roberto sat down, satisfied with the destruction he had caused, adjusting his expensive tie as if he had just concluded a successful negotiation. Eleanor remained seated, paralyzed by humiliation. She could feel all eyes on her, pity, contempt, morbid curiosity. Roberto's words had been calculated to destroy her, to remind her that no matter how much she rose, to them she would always be the janitor, the desperate woman, the mother who had failed. Her hands were shaking so much that she had to place them in her lap to hide them. For a moment she considered standing up and leaving, giving up everything, returning to invisibility where at least she was protected from this kind of cruelty. That's when Elizabeth hit the table again, this time rising with difficulty, her face red with indignation. "Don't you dare speak to her like that, you wicked man!" the elderly woman shouted with a force that surprised everyone. "This janitor, as you call her, has saved more lives in 6 months than you have in your entire career," Elizabeth defended with a firm voice. Grayson raised his hand asking for calm, but Eleanor was already on her feet, her heart beating strongly but her voice surprisingly calm. She looked directly at the manager who had insulted her, remembering all the times she had cleaned his office, invisible and ignored. Now she had a voice, and she was going to use it. "You're right. I was a janitor. And you know what that taught me? It taught me to see the waste that you didn't even notice. It taught me that while we were throwing perfect food in the trash, entire families were going to sleep hungry just a few blocks from here," Eleanor began. Her voice gained strength with each word. "I don't have an MBA, it's true, but I have something that no university teaches. I know what it's like to choose between buying medicine or food. I know what it's like to lie to your daughter saying you're not hungry, because there's only enough food for her. I know what it's like to be evicted, to be humiliated, to be treated like garbage by society," continued Eleanor, now with tears in her eyes but without averting her gaze. The room was in absolute silence. Even the arrogant manager had lowered his eyes. Eleanor opened her folder and took out a photo. It was herself, 6 months ago, thin and worn out, next to a current photo. The transformation was shocking. "This was me when Mr. Grayson found me, and I wasn't the only one. Every family we serve has a story like this. We're not just distributing food, we're restoring dignity, we're saving lives," declared Eleanor. Grayson stood up and went to her. "Eleanor has my full support. The program will not only continue, but will be expanded to all units in the network," announced Grayson with authority that allowed no questioning. The managers nodded, some reluctantly, others genuinely touched by Eleanor's speech. Elizabeth stood up with some difficulty and hugged Eleanor, whispering words of pride and affection in her ear. The meeting continued with details of the expansion, Eleanor presenting her detailed plan for each unit. She had taught herself about logistics, people management, inventory control. She spent nights studying, taking online courses, determined to be worthy of the trust placed in her. When the meeting ended, the manager who had insulted her approached. "I'm sorry, Eleanor. I was wrong. I didn't think about what I was saying. I was prejudiced and ignorant, forgive me," he said, extending his hand. Eleanor shook it because the kindness she had learned included forgiveness. 1 year later, the Thompson Hotel ballroom was magnificently decorated for the Foundation's annual gala. Crystal chandeliers bathed the environment in golden light. Round tables with white tablecloths and fresh flower arrangements awaited the guests, and a stage had been set up for the evening's presentations. Eleanor was in front of the ladies' room mirror, still not believing the woman she saw reflected. The navy blue dress that Grayson and Elizabeth had insisted she buy fit perfectly. Her hair was tied in an elegant bun, and subtle makeup enhanced her features. Luna came running in, twirling in her new pink dress, her curly hair bouncing with every movement. The 8-year-old girl was radiant, her eyes shining with excitement. Eleanor knelt to adjust the bow on her daughter's dress, her heart overflowing with pride and gratitude. "Mum, you look like a princess," exclaimed Luna. Eleanor hugged her daughter, remembering when they barely had enough to eat. The ballroom was beginning to fill with guests, business people, authorities, journalists, and most importantly, representatives of the families served by the program. Eleanor had insisted that it would not be an event just for the rich to congratulate themselves, but a real celebration with the people who made the program meaningful. She circulated through the ballroom, greeting everyone with the same cordiality, making no distinction between the millionaire and the mother she had helped. Grayson approached, impeccable in his tuxedo, Elizabeth on his arm wearing an elegant purple dress. The elderly lady was having an exceptional day of lucidity, her eyes shining with maternal pride as she looked at Eleanor. "You look stunning, my dear," said Elizabeth, kissing Eleanor's face. Grayson agreed with a rare but genuine smile, the kind he reserved for truly special moments. The program's numbers were extraordinary. 5 distribution centers operating at full capacity, 1,000 families served weekly, partnerships with schools, hospitals, and other institutions. But for Eleanor, each number represented a face, a story, a transformed life. She recognized several people in the room: the lady who had cried with gratitude upon receiving her first basket, the unemployed father who now worked as a delivery driver, the single mother who had found in the program not just food, but a support network. Rosa was there too, elegant in a borrowed dress, her 3 children playing with Luna. The family had overcome the crisis. Rosa had secured a better job with Eleanor's letter of recommendation and was now one of the program's most dedicated volunteers. "Eleanor, I can hardly believe everything you've built," said Rosa emotionally. Eleanor hugged her, remembering that it all began with an act of kindness. The Master of Ceremonies announced the beginning of the program, and everyone took their places. Eleanor was called to the stage to give the opening speech, and her legs trembled slightly as she climbed the steps. The packed hall watched her, hundreds of eyes fixed on her, waiting for her words. She adjusted the microphone, took a deep breath, and found Luna's smiling face in the front row. The girl waved discreetly, and Eleanor found her strength. "A year ago, I was a desperate woman. I had lost my job, was about to be evicted, and had no way to feed my daughter. I reached the lowest point a human being can reach," Eleanor began, her clear voice echoing through the hall. The silence was absolute, everyone absorbed by her words. "But in my darkest moment, I found kindness. Donna Penelope, my neighbor, fed me and gave me hope. Elizabeth, whom I didn't even know, showed me that kindness has no price. And Grayson gave me not just a job, but dignity and purpose," continued Eleanor, emotion evident in her voice. She told about the program, about each family served, about how waste had been transformed into hope. She spoke about Rosa and so many other mothers who had found in the program more than food. They had found community. When she mentioned the volunteers, she asked them to stand, and almost half the hall rose to their feet. The applause was thunderous, people discreetly wiping away tears. "This program proves that kindness is contagious, that when we plant seeds of compassion, we harvest forests of hope," declared Eleanor. Grayson watched with obvious pride. Elizabeth then took the stage, assisted by Grayson but determined to speak. Her voice began trembling but gained strength as she told her version of the story. How she had gotten lost, scared and confused, and a stranger had spent everything she had to help her. How that stranger had become the savior not only of her, but of thousands. The elderly woman took Eleanor's hand, raising it like a champion, and the hall erupted in applause again. It was when Grayson took the microphone that the hall fell into expectant silence. He rarely spoke in public about personal matters, preferring to keep the focus on business. "Eleanor taught me something fundamental. Success without purpose is failure. Therefore, I am pleased to announce that Eleanor is being promoted to Director of Social Responsibility for the entire Thompson Group," he announced. Eleanor almost dropped the microphone in surprise. The evening continued with presentations, dinners, and celebrations, but the most touching moment was yet to come. A young woman of about 20 approached Eleanor during the cocktail hour, accompanied by an older woman. The young woman seemed nervous, holding an envelope in her hands. "Eleanor, you probably don't remember me. My name is Anna. You helped my family in the first month of the program," said the young woman. Eleanor tried to remember. There were so many families, so many faces. Anna continued, now with tears in her eyes. "My mother was sick. My father had abandoned us, and I had dropped out of college to work. Your baskets fed us for months, but more than that, you convinced me to go back to school," revealed Anna. She opened the envelope and showed a newly earned university diploma. "I graduated in social work, and I came back to help with the program. I've been a volunteer for 6 months, every Tuesday and Thursday," said Anna, now openly crying. Eleanor hugged her, also in tears, understanding that the circle had been completed. The kindness that she had received, She had passed on, and now it was coming back multiplied. Elizabeth, who had approached, placed her hand on Eleanor's shoulder. "See, my child, kindness always comes back," said the elderly woman with wisdom. Eleanor looked around the hall. Dozens of stories like Anna's, hundreds of transformed lives, thousands of meals saving families. "And it will continue to come back," Eleanor promised herself. The event ended late at night, but Eleanor was not tired. She was energized, renewed, full of plans for the future that unfolded in her mind like a map of infinite possibilities. Luna slept in her arms as they waited for the car, the small body completely relaxed, exhausted from so much excitement. The girl's pink dress was slightly wrinkled, the hair bow crooked, but her face showed a serene smile even in sleep. Eleanor adjusted her daughter better in her arms, feeling the sweet weight of that responsibility that had been her driving force in all difficult moments. Grayson and Elizabeth approached for the final farewell, both with expressions of genuine affection. Elizabeth held Eleanor's face between her hands, her blue eyes shining with tears of pride. "You exceeded all my expectations, my child. Your mother, wherever she is as proud as I am," said the elderly woman, kissing Eleanor's forehead. Grayson, usually reserved, embraced Eleanor warmly, whispering that she had transformed not only the program, but the entire company culture. "Next week, Monday, 9 o'clock, we'll plan the national expansion. Prepare your most ambitious ideas," said Grayson with a smile that Eleanor had learned to recognize as genuine enthusiasm. As the car crossed the silent city, Eleanor looked through the window, seeing the familiar streets from a new perspective. There was the corner where she had begged for a job at the bakery. Now she thought about proposing a partnership to donate bread at the end of the day. She passed by the market where they had denied her a position as a stocker. It could be a collection point for foods approaching their expiration date. Each place that once represented a closed door was now an opportunity waiting to be explored. The contrast was surreal. Exactly 1 year ago, she had walked these same streets with her heart tight with despair, counting coins, calculating how many days she could survive. Now she crossed the city as director of social responsibility, with power and resources to change lives. "Mum, are we home yet?" Luna murmured sleepily. Eleanor kissed her daughter's forehead, breathing in her sweet child's scent. The building where they lived had undergone a complete transformation under the new management. The facade had been painted, the front garden renovated, the stairs properly illuminated. Eleanor climbed the steps carrying Luna, but now without the weight of fear and uncertainty that had accompanied her before. The apartment welcomed them with its renewed coziness, walls painted in soft tones, new but simple furniture, a fully equipped kitchen. It was the same physical space where she had cried in despair, but now transformed into a true home. Eleanor carefully placed Luna in bed, removing her shoes and covering her with the new unicorn comforter. The girl mumbled something about the pretty dress and fell back into deep sleep. Eleanor stayed there for long minutes, watching her daughter's peaceful sleep, remembering the nights when Luna slept hungry, the mornings when she had no breakfast to offer. She left the bedroom and went to the living room, still wearing her gala dress. She stopped in front of the window, observing the sleeping city. Somewhere out there, a mother like she had been was awake, desperate, not knowing how she would feed her children tomorrow. Eleanor made a silent promise to find each of these mothers, each of these families. The program had served thousands, but she knew there was much more to do. She took a notebook and began writing ideas: mobile distribution centers to reach distant neighborhoods, professional training programs along with food baskets, daycare centers so mothers could look for jobs. Her mind worked quickly, each idea leading to another. It was no longer about surviving, it was about ensuring no one else needed to go through what she did. She went to the kitchen and opened the full refrigerator. There was fresh milk, fruits, vegetables, proteins, abundance that a year ago would have been an impossible dream. She remembered the night she had taken expired milk from the trash, the shame and desperation of that moment. Now she understood that humiliation had been part of the journey, had been necessary for her to truly understand the urgency and dignity the program needed to have. She prepared a chamomile tea and sat at the kitchen table, the same table where she had counted and recounted her last cents. On it now were the promotion documents, the new badge with her title, the keys to the office that would be hers starting Monday. "Thank you, Mum," she whispered to the silence, remembering her mother's teachings about kindness and perseverance. Donna Penelope was right in her simple wisdom. The kindness we plant always comes back. Donna Penelope was right. "Sometimes it takes time, but it always comes back multiplied," Eleanor said aloud in the silent apartment, the words echoing like a prayer of gratitude. She thought of Elizabeth, who even in her mental confusion had recognized kindness and insisted on reciprocating it, of Grayson, who had seen beyond social prejudice and given a chance to a desperate cleaner, of Rosa, who now helped other families as hers had been helped, of Anna, who transformed gratitude into action, becoming a social worker. The circle of kindness had no end, each act generating another, each gesture creating waves that spread infinitely. Eleanor went to her bedroom, finally feeling the day's fatigue. She took off the elegant dress and put on her simple pajamas, but the smile never left her face. She lay down on the bed that no longer creaked, on sheets that weren't torn, under a ceiling that no longer had leaks. But the biggest change wasn't in the physical environment, it was in herself. The broken woman who had considered it the end was now a leader, a voice for the voiceless, a bridge between two worlds that rarely touched. Tomorrow would be Sunday, a day to take Luna to the park, to prepare a special lunch, to live the simple and precious life they had won. Monday would begin the new phase with more responsibilities, more challenges, more lives to touch. Eleanor closed her eyes and before falling asleep made one last reflection. The kindness of a stranger in helping a lost elderly woman had created a wave that now fed thousands of families. And as she fell asleep, she dreamed of all the seeds of kindness yet to be planted, of all the lives yet to be transformed, of all the love yet to be multiplied in this world that so needed hope. Now tell me in the comments where you're from and tell me, did you like this story? Then subscribe to the channel, leave your like and check out the next one that's waiting for you here on the screen. I'll wait for you there.